opportunity to go out there in 2000, I think it was 15, and we met a young man named Nate Loper. If you ever go out there, he's in charge of, back then he wasn't, but now he's in charge of Canyon Ministries. Canyon Ministries does the raft trips down in the canyon, and usually every trip that they take, there's a scientist or somebody from Answers in Genesis or RCI or one of those, and those trips are fantastic if you can get on them. They're usually booked out a year or two. And then they also have what they call a different view. And the different view, they basically get you on a bus and they take you on the south rim, and they explain the Grand Canyon in a creation sense. And so that's actually, if you go, the different views, a great thing to go to take. And anyway, Brother Nate, I met him through Carl Kirby, who's a creationist, and I'd called Carl and said, hey, who do I find at the Grand Canyon that can teach me what it is about the Grand Canyon and how God formed it instead of how the secular world says. So Nate took me out, and if you notice, I'm in a picture there with a yellow shirt. The different view tour guides would wear a yellow shirt, so we ended up staying, and I'd get on the bus with him all the time and basically be his assistant tour guide. And so I got to take the tour over and over, learned a whole bunch, enjoyed it. Sometimes he'd have a big enough crowd that he couldn't answer all the questions. So after a couple of trips, I could answer questions too. And they all thought I was getting paid. But it was a good time. So we spent a month and a half there with him, and he taught a lot of things. So this is what I want you to see about the Grand Canyon. The Grand Canyon is one of God's wonders. It's one of the places that they can see from outer space. Over 5 million people visit there a year. So the Grand Canyon is very interesting. The highest point at the Grand Canyon is the Kaibab Plateau at 9,200 feet. The north rim averages 1,500 feet higher than the south rim. The canyon is 6,000 feet deep, or 1 mile deep. The river that runs in there is over 277 miles long and covers 1.5 million acres. The northwest point is 4 miles across. The widest is 18 miles across. So the narrowest point is 4 miles across, and the widest is 18 miles across. Right in front of the lodges of the Grand Canyon Village is the widest point, and it averages 10 miles across. So, I mean, when you get up and you're standing on the edge and you're looking down, if you decide to jump, you'll make the fastest 1 mile run you've ever done. So it's vast. If you can see there's us with a group of a youth group came down from, while we were there, a youth group came down from Washington. The pastor of that group, this guy right here, was we all know Mike Nemeth. That's Mike Nemeth's brother-in-law, and that's his sister-in-law, and his wife is right there. And so they came down, and we happened to be at the canyon, and they were like, yeah, we're going to stop before we go to the Navajo reservation for a camp meeting. And they were like, we'd like to kind of have somebody tell us about the Grand Canyon. And Mike's brother-in-law was like, so Joe, do you got it all down now? And I was like, yeah, let's do it. So I was the tour guide for them, and that was quite fun. We had a great time. The headwaters of the Colorado, and this is what we have to get down. The secular world says the Grand Canyon is formed how? Anybody remember? How? Rivers. It's formed because of the river, right? Technically, yes, but no. Erosion. Right. So if we look at the thought processes of erosion, as I go through this, you're going to find out why that cannot be. But They used to sit there, and then I remember in science class, they'd sit there and go, the Grand Canyon was eroded by the Colorado River by millions and billions of years. But it can't do that because the river doesn't flow fast enough to erode anything. And I'll show you that later on in this. But here's the first thing. The headwaters of the Colorado River begin at La Purdy Pass Lake in the Rocky Mountain National Park in Colorado. The elevation of the lake is approximately 9,000 feet. So if the lake is 9,000 feet elevation, and remember the Grand Canyon, what was the highest point? Was 9,200 feet. Then there's 200 feet that water has to go uphill to erode. And so when we think about that, what you have to understand is, as you follow that Colorado River coming from its starting waters, it travels a long ways just to get over towards the Grand Canyon. I mean, it's hundreds of miles it goes, and then once it gets to the Grand Canyon, all of a sudden it has to go up 200 feet. But it actually has to go up more because it fell coming out of the Rocky Mountain National Park. Now, anybody know where Rocky Mountain National Park is in Colorado? It's technically central Colorado, and some people would even say it's East Colorado. So to get to the Grand Canyon, you got to go all the way through Colorado. And so Rocky Mountain National Park, if you look at Colorado, you look in where so you got basically Kansas, Colorado, that's the flatland. And then you get to that wall of mountains that shoots up, and at the north part of that is where the Rocky Mountain National Park is. Rocky Mountain National Park is. And then you go through all that, and you go through the rest of Colorado, so over half of Colorado to get to the point that you're gonna get to where you're now in Arizona, and you're gonna be able to start, looking at Grand Canyon. So when you look at that, what you have to understand is there's a long ways, there's always a drop in elevation for the river to flow, right? Because if it didn't have a drop in elevation, we'd have a lake. So there's drops in elevation for those hundreds of miles just to get to the Grand Canyon, yet we have 200 feet higher. And so the Colorado starts at a lower elevation than the rim of the Grand Canyon. That's an important thing to remember, because at that point, does water flow uphill? That's where we have to come to. So then we have to figure out, how is it formed? Now, if you watch this, did you notice that at first there was a dam, and the dam broke?
800 feet of water, enough to fill a sports stadium 3 times, drained in about an hour.
So you see where this breach in the dam is. The guy's talking about that. But what we got to get to is, so now that we watched that dam break, we got to come to the thought is, I've had some observation. Remember, science is not what somebody tells you. Science is observation. If we do the scientific method, we want to do observation. So, and what do? We repeat it to make sure that it's consistent. And so if the first time we look at it, a dam, water comes up to a high level, it starts coming over the edge of a dam, it'll start to break that dam down, and as soon as it gets enough of breakage, that water speeds up and that dam breaks further. So then if we understand that, then we have to look at the Grand Canyon in a whole different perspective. So when we look at that, then we have to understand that there's 900 cubic miles of missing material in the Grand Canyon. So where did it go? So here's the answer. All right, so if you watch that, if you go to Answers in Genesis, they're the ones that created that. Look, when we read Scripture, it doesn't say that it rained for 40 days and 40 nights. It says the bottoms of the deep opened. And so what you have is you have water coming from above, rain, and then you have the waters of the deep. It talks about, and when you look at that, you have to start understanding, look, you didn't just have so you have volcanoes going on under the water. There's all this water occurring, and so you're going to have basically tsunami. So when you look at this and the way they built that film, you're going to have tidal waves. So then how do you know that these things are, the flood, how it worked? Look, we can look all around, and if even in Kansas, you can see a flooding effect in Kansas. And so if you look at that, you can see that there's water everywhere. It's interesting, how far are we from the beach? Think about that. How far are we from the beach? If you go to Galveston, it's what, 9 hours? So why is it that most of the fossils we find in Kansas, and I know it's hard to believe you can find fossils in Kansas, but last Wednesday I was with Brother Ken over here, and we were running around finding a whole bunch of sea life fossils just west of Winfield. And so, you go out there and you can find, and so if you look around here, you'll see multi-aquatic death plate. There's one out in the foyer that's about this big that my youngest daughter grabbed, and she said, "Hey, Dad, look at this. You need to take it to the car." And I said, "No, you take it to the car." So she lugged it to the car, and she's still complaining about it. But that was a week and a half ago. Well, it's a week and a half ago. So anyway, you look at that, and there's seashells, and there's crinoids, and there's all this sea life. And so how does that happen? It's because there's a world flood. The proof is all over the place. So now when we get back to the Colorado, how's the Colorado formed? It's not formed by eroding water over millions of billions of years. So if you look at this slide, you start looking at the Colorado River, right? And so as we follow the Colorado River, now notice that right here is where the river starts, okay? And it comes down and goes all the way through. It goes through Lake Powell. The only reason Lake Powell's there is because of a dam. But then it gets in and it goes into the Grand Canyon. And so as you look at that and you start understanding that, you have to get to the point is, how is it that this is formed? Okay, so now, remember, it starts here, and it's at 9,000 feet. But at here, right there at that bend, if you look on a relief map, that bend has a ridge. Both sides. And obviously a ridge went through there. There's the dam that we have. And we got to somehow, if you follow regular contours, the Colorado River, when it came down, if it followed regular contours, should have ran down this way and out. But it didn't. So then we have to go, how did it do that? Here's another thing. Look at rivers around the world, and you won't find a 90-degree bend like this. So why is that there? It's interesting if you look at all that. Remember how much dirt did I say was missing? How much material was missing? 900 cubic miles. You go in here and you'll find this area right here is all that material. So think about that. So we go further. When you go down into the Grand Canyon, you get down here, and what this lady's fingers are on here is what you see here. You see this little boulder here in this line? That's called the Great Unconformity. This rock here is creation rock. It's the 3-day basically creation rock. This here is the sedimentary rock from the flood. So when we start looking at that, if you come over here, this is kind of a cool rock. I found it last year, last fall. The top part of this rock here This white stuff is sandstone. This bottom part from here down is called Baraboo quartzite. The reason you know it's Baraboo quartzite is because the iron in the quartzite makes it have a red look. If you look at most quartz, it's not this dark red. But this is Baraboo quartzite. So they say that this is creation rock. This is from the Genesis 3, creation, 7-day creation. And this is from the flood. So you got creation rock and judgment rock on the same rock. It's kind of a neat thing. That's what that line is. So there's two places I've been to see the Great Unconformity. One is at the Grand Canyon, and then one is up in Wisconsin Dells. You can find it there. And so then what we have to start looking, if you notice that round pebble right there, inside that line of sandstone. So the bottom level of the Grand Canyon is called Tepete sandstone. When you look at the Tepete sandstone, what you'll find out is the top part, the Tepete sandstone is where that first layer is. You're going to find down at the bottom a whole bunch of these little round rocks. Now, why are the rocks round? Because we have to look at rivers. River rock, anytime you go get river gravel or river rock, it's always round. Why? Because the water's always running over it, right? If you ever want to shine up some rocks, you get some of these rocks that are all kind of scraggly and beat up and look like normal rocks. You throw them into a tumbler and you add water and dirt and they tumble. They start getting round, so then you end up with the polished rocks. For those, you have to change the different mixtures until you get them polished like you want. But you'll end up with polished round rock. They're smooth. So if you look at this, here's the thing. If we look at everything, we have to understand that when the world flood comes, we have these tidal waves. So now the topsoil is getting scraped off. And what stops, if anybody sits there and has lived near the ocean, what do you have when you're out at the ocean? You go out to the beach and the water's close, and then sometimes you go out to the beach and the water's way out there. What do we call that? The tide. What's the tide based on? The moon. So the moon acts like a magnet and pulls the tide around. So what stops the water from getting onto, coming to us? I mean, if the moon's running it around, why don't we have water in Kansas coming from the tide? It's because the land, the elevation. Now, if there's no land, what stops the tide? Nothing. So if you think about that, if we've now got enough water that there is no land mass to stop it, you're going to end up having this tide, and it's going to run in circles, right, all the way around the map. So now what's going to happen is all the rocks that are moving are going to tumble. And remember, how many days do we have of basically Noah's flood? I mean, you sit there and he sits there and he gets to 120, and then he spent more days on the boat, the ark, but you got 120 days at least that there's movement of nothing stopping everything. So constantly, all the layers are getting scraped off until they get down to the hard stuff. All the soft stuff scraped off. So you got this huge muddy water thing going on, right? And then God starts working on some stuff because now he's got to get everything back in place. And that's when you start getting the layers. We start looking at layers. How do we get layers? They lay down quickly, right? So you get layers with a lot of dirt and a lot of water in a very little bit of time. Not these millions of billions of years everybody wants to put on them. So then we start getting those layers. And as you put more pressure on them, you start getting more weight. Now, here's the thing. If what the evolutionists say is correct, and that each one of these layers, so look at this. Look how straight these layers are, right? If each one of these layers are, each line between layer is laid over, it's laid down and then 1,000 years happen and then the next layer lays down, all the top here, so what we should have is each layer comes down not in a line. It should come down something like this where it's not conformed straight, where this is how it's laid down. See, if we got time, we're going to end up having bumps because we end up having, what was the word you said? Erosion, right? So over time, we should have erosion. So if that area is exposed for any length of time and there's erosion, we shouldn't have these perfectly straight lines. We should have, these really, angled and crags and holes and everything else, but we don't have those. It doesn't look like this if you go to the Painted Desert. It looks like this. And so if it doesn't look like this, where there's erosion involved, then there's no time in between. Everybody get what I'm saying? So be careful when they say, oh, this is 1,000 years after this, and this is 1,000 years, and that's 1,000 years. That can't be, because in 1,000 years, it should look like this at the top. And it doesn't. And then if the next layer is laid down, it should be laid down at a wiggle woggle instead of a straight line. So we have to look at that. Look, there's no erosion between the layers. It's important we understand that. Now you get into this, here's the other thing. Notice these lines in this turn are what? Straight. So how does this occur? Here's how it occurs. When it's being laid down, it's all soft, right? Because it's all sedimentary. And as you get pressure, it all changes. But see, if it gets pushed from two sides, it bows. Why? Because it's soft. It's not hard yet. All right, so it's formed in its soft layer. Notice concrete. You ever try to bend concrete? Can you bend it?
I can.
You can break it, but you can't bend it. But if something were to come up and push from both sides, you end up looking like this instead of like that, right? Now, can you make concrete look like that? When it's soft before it hardens. Do you see what I'm saying? So this is formed while it's still soft, and it's formed, look, this portion here is laid down quickly, and then it's formed. Does that make sense? It has to be soft. Once it starts getting hard, you can't bend it. So we're also looking there, we have to look at those striations. We still don't have any added time. Does that make sense? So now, Monument Valley. Now think about this. If I took a piece of paper, right, or a board, and I glued 5 rocks to the board, and then I filled the whole board with sand, right? And I set it down into a tub. It's a great thing to do with kids when you're trying to illustrate this. But you set it all down in a tub with water in it. And when you lift that board up, what leaves? All the sand. What stays? Anything that's hard. So if you think about that, you look at Monument Valley, as the water recedes, right? As the Lord brings the earth back up after the flood, all the hard stuff is going to stay, and the rest of it is going to recede. Now, the interesting thing about Monument Valley is if you notice these right here, right? They want to sit there and they go over time, millions and billions of years of erosion, yada, yada, yada. There wouldn't be anything up there if that was true, and these wouldn't be that small if there was millions and billions of years. When they measure this, there's not enough fall off. Okay? So number one, studying these, you don't get the time that they want you to have. And then if you look, we're still looking at these lines, right? Still looking at these lines. There's no difference in the line timeline. Now, this is what I was saying about that bend. When I first started studying the Grand Canyon, this got me right here. I love typographical maps and I love relief maps. I remember in high school when they came out with the plastic maps that had the little mountains, I'd just stand there and look at them. I was like, this is so cool. You know, this map, you can look at it, actually has elevation in it, you know. But you look at this and look at the height of elevation, that white line. So, like I told you, that Colorado River naturally should have followed right along there. It would have followed right along there. It would not have gone through that. So now we got to sit there and figure out, how did it get through something that was 200 feet higher than the starting point of the Colorado River? We don't have, look, the secular answer doesn't work because we don't have something force to pump the water uphill. Okay? So now what we have to do is if we look in that area, you go around and you'll find these mineral deposits all the way around. That there were two lakes. One was called Grand Lake and one was called Hopi Lake. Now remember, right here is the Grand Canyon. Okay? So these two lakes sit in that area, and we're talking about right after the Ice Age, right? So we have the flood, right? The waters recede. Let me ask you this. When you get outside in your yard and the waters recede from the rain, do you not have puddles? So if we have a small rain and a little flood in Kansas, that's not a world flood. We have small puddles. We got a world flood, we got big puddles. Now here's the thing. If you go right now and you go to, is it Great Basin, Doc? In Cherokee, Oklahoma? It's called the Great Basin? Great Salt Plains. If you go to the Great Salt Plains, if you go there, there's still a puddle left from the flood. Why? Because it's got salt water. You go to the Great Salt Lake, there's a puddle left from the flood. If you go to, White Sands, New Mexico, there's a whole bunch of salt in that white sand. Why? Because it used to be a puddle left over from the flood. So when you start looking around, there's a whole bunch of these puddles all over the world that are left over from the flood, and what you find is you can find where those lakes were just by finding the mineral deposits on the edge. And over time, it evaporates. So the shallower it was, it evaporated. You know, some of these, we still have water in the Great Salt Lake. We still have water in the basin, Great Salt Basin down there in Cherokee. You still have water there. Well, because it was a little bit deeper than the others, it hadn't all evaporated yet. There's nowhere for it to escape, so over time it's going to evaporate. So this is how they disappear. Either at some point they escape, okay, the water escapes, or it evaporates. If it evaporates, it leaves all that salt minerals left. And so that's why you see a difference. So here's the thing. You go through the ice, you go through the flood, and after the flood's over, what do we have going on right after the flood? Anybody know? We got the Ice Age going on. So as the world starts to get itself back into normal, we have an Ice Age that occurs. It occurs for about 600 years. And so what we have is melt, right? So you go to the Rocky Mountains and you go up to where the Colorado River is. The Colorado River starts creating, basically, the spring starts letting out stuff and it starts basically becoming a river. As it works its way, how does that river get full most of the time? Is off of the runoff from the winter. That runoff builds up, and guess what? It deposits itself in these two lakes. So during that Ice Age time, that 400 years, you're going to have a buildup of water until what happens? The lakes get so full that there's nowhere for the water to go. So now we get to a point that the water runs over the edge, like we saw that dam video. It starts running over the edge. Well, as it starts running over the edge, breaking off material, then it starts speeding up, like we saw in the video, and then it starts cutting through the earth. Now, I don't know about you guys, but when I was little, I used to think it was great to take the hose, and in North Carolina, there's a whole bunch of fire ants, and I would take the hose, and they would march, and they'd have these paths. And so I'd take the hose and I'd put a canyon in their path, because it was fun, right? But how did I make the canyon? I pushed down the edge of that hose, making a lot of pressure, and it would cut through that dirt. And listen, it had cut quite a ways in that dirt. It didn't take much work. And so if you think about that process, we all as kids have taken the hose and, cut our canyons in our parents' yards to get them upset with us, right? And so you think about that, then this starts making sense. So what you end up having is, at some point, the Grand Lake and Hopi Lake get so big that they end up busting through it breaches this dam. And so then as it breaches the dam, it's going to start pushing dirt out. Now here's the thing. Let me go back. Oh, no, I don't have to. I forgot I have this slide. This slide right here, look at how the tributaries. So you got right here, you got the Missouri River, comes out of Montana, runs all the way down, and then ends up in the Mississippi. You got the Mississippi River coming down here. You got the Ohio coming in here. How do the tributaries, how do they feed rivers? They feed in line with them. Notice the direction. They come in and just kind of come in softly with them, right? They don't come in against them. Are you getting what I'm saying? Notice here at the Grand Canyon, all these side canyons that come up are actually in the opposite direction of the normal flow of a water system, which then creates the thing, how were they formed? They had to be formed with the water shooting towards them and up them. And so then what you have is you have those two lakes emptying out. Do you remember in the video the guy said that there was so many gallons of water went through in this short period of time? Look, that's how the canyons are formed. It's a lot of water in a short period of time. You go, well, how do you know that? Well, the reason I can say that, and I can say that well, is that, remember, science is observation, right? The scientific method is observation. So what have I observed to see a canyon form in my lifetime?
Fire ants.
Well, we can go with the fire ants, but better than that, we can go to Mount St. Helens. Because in 1980, Mount St. Helens blew. And it laid down all these layers. Now think about this. Mount St. Helens, we always go to the 1980 volcanic eruption. But we actually have 3 different eruptions that occur. And during that, you have the first eruption occur, and then you have ice buildup in the volcano itself, and then you have a second eruption occur that melts all the ice in the volcano, that then starts a river system, and that river system cuts through all those layers that are laid down that aren't solid yet, and actually creates a canyon. It created a canyon in 3 hours that was 100 feet deep. That's in Mount St. Helens, and wasn't it 82? It was 2 years later, right? I have another one on Mount St. Helens, but I think it was, I haven't read over it. It's 1982. So in a 2-year period of Mount St. Helens erupting and putting all that dirt down on layers, if you went to Mount St. Helens in 1979, you would have went to this one lodge. The lodge was covered with over 300 feet of sediment. And so now all of a sudden, and one lake that was there actually went up 300 feet in elevation. And so when you look at that, we can observe that, and all of a sudden now we got this canyon. If you go to Mount St. Helens today, you got a small Grand Canyon going on. It's 100 feet deep. So now we have scientific observation that would make this make sense. So how is the Grand Canyon formed? It's because 2 lakes end up going over the dam. How does that happen? Over this however many years it took of buildup during the Ice Age, as water, as the snows and everything else started melting, it would keep filling that lake. Get this, as the Colorado River spring, where its headwaters is, kept coming into that lake over time, it had nowhere to go, it's going to go somewhere. So that's when you have this occur. You get this dam break, and it starts running through all that. Now remember, the key is when we look at this, how do we know that's true? It's these side canyons in the direction. So any water in the Grand Canyon flowing in from the canyon, going into the river, is going in at the abnormal direction than a normal tributary to a river. Does that make sense? So when you start looking at that, you have to start going, wait a minute, is what they're telling me true? Because this is what it should look like. If the river runs this way, everything adding in, the Missouri River comes right in and flows right into the Mississippi. It flows in. It doesn't flow against, right? So that's clear, right? So now we get to this part. If you start getting up, so I used to live right about there. And that's Lake Missoula, and there's Missoula, but that's Lake Missoula. Glacier National Park is right around here. You got Spokane. I used to live right about there. And if you go into Spokane, and actually when I used to go to visit Mike Nemeth, the pastor that was in that picture, he lives right in this area of Washington. Anyway, used to travel down this way, and you go through what they call the Scablands. What do the Scablands look like? A place that there was large flow of water. Why is it that in this picture Missoula's under the water? Because that's the old Lake Missoula that was coming from after the glacier melts. There became a lake, and then that lake had to go somewhere. And so you have the same thing occurring. This is what the Scablands look like. Doesn't that look like water ran through there? And that's what it looks like. There's hundreds of miles of that. It's just the ugliest nothing place. But neat stuff to find in it. So then you get the Great Salt Lake. Look, every year the minerals in the Salt Lake get denser. Why? Because of evaporation. Because there's nowhere for the waters to go. And so it gets saltier and saltier. White Sands, New Mexico. Notice what's left of that big puddle is now there. But you go in here in this White Sands, and what do you find? A whole bunch of lake minerals. You find salt and everything else. Now we get to the neat part, the Grand Canyon. You have all these formations. Now notice each one of those are straight lines. So you get the Kaibab Formation, you get the Torweep Formation, you get the Conoco Sandstone, you get the Hermit Shale, you get the Supai Group, you get the Red Wall Limestone. What's interesting about Red Wall Limestone, what color is limestone? White. You know why the Red Wall Limestone is red? It's because in the Supai Group there's iron, and when the water flows down, it basically dyes the rock on the outside red. So when you go in there, if you see where after the winter, during the winter, when the water gets into that limestone, and then it freezes, water expands. So a lot of times these rocks will pop out, and then you'll see the white just long enough until good rain comes and it dyes it again to that red. So it's an interesting thing. But you end up getting to the Temple Butte Formation, the Mojave Limestone, the Angel Bright Shale, and then you get to that Tepete Sandstone. Where you get to the Tepete Sandstone, and right there is where the flood ends, and this here gets you to the basement rock, gets you into basically like that Baraboo quartzite. So you get into creation rock. So now you get, this is a normal chart by the secular world that says, hey, you're just going to find modern animals there, you're going to find monkeys and ape there. I got to ask you one question. So I know we're in Kansas and the wind blows dirt, but when's the last time it rained dirt? And why is it that the earth doesn't measure larger every year? Because if we're going to lay down these layers and say every layer is years and years, then we must be adding dirt. Do you get what I'm saying? But we're not adding dirt. We're not adding a bigger circumference around the earth. We're moving dirt, but we're not adding. So this doesn't make sense. And what you find is you'll find, and I'm going to do a thing on living fossils. What you'll find is that's all a fake farce that everybody's trying to get you to believe so they can put their millions and billions of years and they can say, I don't want to be under the authority of God. I want to be under my own authority. That's the truth. You know, the problem is that the Lord's coming back, and he's coming back pretty soon, especially as bad as things are getting. And if people don't get in line and get a hold of God, the devil's happy to take them. So, you know, we need this information so we can let people know, look, the Bible is true. I teach creation for one purpose alone, is so that Christians will see that the Bible's true from the first word to the last word. And the one thing that we get caught up in is evolution, because we go, oh, well, science says. No, science doesn't say. The secular world says, and they say it's science. But it's not science. And they'll sit there and they say, we have the evidence. Well, you know what I learned in law enforcement? Is the evidence that I collect, the defense gets to use. So it's really not my evidence. It's everybody's evidence. The question is the interpretation of the evidence. Can I tell you this? What you should be doing today as Doc presents and as I present is you got to sit there with an investigator's mind and go, what makes the most sense? Does all this stuff that evolution's saying and looking at the fossils and the bones and the rocks and everything, does that make the most sense? Or does God's word make the most sense? Here's the thing. They don't have a witness statement. They have a hypothesis. We have a witness statement, and the witness is God through his scriptures. So how are you going to interpret the evidence? You know, these things are marvelous, these large animals we come to. The one thing you have to understand, too, is there's three different major types of rock. So you have the metamorphic rocks, the igneous rocks, and the sedimentary rocks. Sedimentary rocks are what? They're rocks they're basically a whole bunch of sand, dirt, or lime that's been set down. There's chalk, and it's all been set down, and over time it's gotten hard because of the pressures on it. Okay? So those are those. What do? Look, if you gravel this parking lot, and we've done it one year with sandstone, guess what you have at the end of a couple months? Sand. But if we gravel it with igneous rocks or metamorphic rocks, guess what we have? Gravel. After a couple months. Why? Because it doesn't break down as easily. When we get into the metamorphic rock, or most of the time you find these rocks around volcanoes because they're created by heat. You get into the metamorphic rock, and there's a whole bunch of other things that involve it, but those three rocks are the different types of rock. The metamorphic rocks are rocks that are minerals that are changed under heat and pressure. Igneous rocks are created when magma cools and becomes solid. If you go up to like where Brother Mike's from up there in Washington, if you go in a cave up there, most of those caves, when you touch the walls, feel like glass. Because they're all created by volcanic eruption and air getting in. They're basically air tubes. But you get out to like Mammoth Cave, and what you find is a whole different type of cave. You don't find these volcanic caves. You find caves with sedimentary and metamorphic rock and different things like that. So igneous rocks are rocks that are the ones that were superheated and originally liquid, and they become the center, they come from the center of the earth, not really the center, but they are often started there. And so when you start looking at it, look, those are the ones that, so if you come up here and you find, I just lost the name. Obsidian, there we go. If you come up here and you look at the rocks, there'll be these black, shiny rocks, and it's called obsidian. Some of them are marked. If you look at that obsidian, they look like glass. Now, the neat thing about obsidian, just as a side note, is if you can chip obsidian, which you can, and you chip it to a fine edge, if you put it under an electron microscope, it's sharper than a razor blade. So when I was in the military doing survival school, if I was in a volcanic area, I'd go and find obsidian because they make the greatest tools. Once you chip them, you can cut with them. You can do everything you want to do as a knife or an axe or whatever. It's phenomenal. But it's all made by molten rock. Molten liquid, basically. So then you get into metamorphic. Now, this is where the heat and pressures change whatever it may be. You start looking at, that's where the crystallization comes. You get, you go out to that Great Salt Basin and you end up getting those crystals. There's some up here from that area. And church, if you want to go down to Cherokee, we can make a trip because those are pretty neat crystals and they're not really hard to find. And the kids love digging in the sand. So we could do that. But that's where you're going to find your crystals and all those kind of things. So then you get sedimentary rock. Those are the ones you see laid in these layers. Notice these layers. This is a picture from the Painted Desert out in Arizona. But you look at this and what do you have? You've got straight lines. Look, you got to remember, straight lines don't get laid over thousands of years because you don't have any erosion. Look, when you study natural science and the miracles of creation, if you don't turn into a mystic, you are not a natural scientist. Look, it takes more faith to believe in evolution than it does to believe in creation. It takes more faith to be an atheist than it does to believe God. Science brings men nearer to God. That's Louis Pasteur. That's the guy who cleaned up your milk. He did many other things, but when you sit there, look, why was he a scientist? Because it brings him closer to God. Don't doubt the Creator because it is inconceivable that accidents alone could be the controller of this universe. Look, we're not here by accident. Remember, my whole point in this whole thing is that you get to the point that you know that your Bible's true from the first word in it to the last word in it, and that evolution has nothing to do with anything except for it's the biggest fairy tale and lie ever told. And if you're at the Grand Canyon, don't leave your backpack laying on the ground. That little guy, he's a kaibab squirrel, and man, he knew I had nuts in there. He'd get in there and he'd take my nuts, and they said don't feed him, so I'd just leave it sitting there with it open. It was kind of fun. We had a good time with that. Look, if your mind is in the right mind, your mind's on God. If it's in the wrong mind, it's on the world. Look, get your mind on God. Remember that He did create. Every word in that scripture is true. All right, we're gonna stop for 10 minutes, and then Doc's gonna do his presentation, and then as soon as we're done that, we'll go to lunch, and then we'll come back up for the other two. Remember, I'm doing living fossils on the second one, the one right after lunch, and that one compares the names of fossilized stuff to the names of living stuff, and the names are totally different, and they shouldn't be because they look identical. So it helps you understand that, look, a lot of this is just deceit, and people